Hello, in this video I'm covering the game between Fabiano Caruana and Alireza Firouzja from round 9 of Grand Swiss. The opening was Caro-Kann, and Fabi chose advanced variation, after which he chose the Tal variation with h4. Firouzja played h5 and now bishop d3, and after queen a5, knight d2. And here black played e6. Because if he tries queen a6 immediately to exchange queens, now the problem is e6. And if he takes on e6, queen g6, king d7, knight gf3 is very dangerous. The king is out in the open and it's not good for black at all. And if he takes on d3, then white can take on f7, king f7, and after cd3, the knight from d2 goes to f3, the knight from g1 goes to h3, and the g5 and the e5 squares are pretty weak, so he chose to play e6, so white doesn't play e6 himself. Now knight e2, knight e7, and now Fabi chose to play b4, which is quite rare. And black doesn't want to capture because of rook b1 and taking on b7, which would mean that black's king is in danger. So he just played queen a6, and now after queen b3, knight f5 goes, because black wants to develop his bishop. And now Fabi plays knight f3. And Firouzja plays knight d7 here. Here queen c4 was also deserving attention. And if white takes on c4, then d takes, and in case of bishop d2, to just get this knight on d5. Instead, he played first knight d7, and Fabi plays a4, and now Firouzja chooses to play queen c4. And again, this exchange is not something that white wants to do, because it would lead to a completely blocked position after something like bishop d2, knight b6, a5 maybe, and after this, bishop e7. It seems like white cannot break through here. Knights are excellent on d5 and f5. So he tries to keep the tension by bishop d2. And now Firouzja took on b3, cb3, and tries to break the center by f6. White castles, bishop e7. Now he wants to capture on e5 and take on h4. So Fabi plays g3, defending this pawn one more time. And black plays king f7. Rook fe1, and now he takes on e5, and now d5. And Firouzja plays rook ac8, and Fabi goes for knight f4 to stop c5, because if Firouzja plays c5 now, then he can take on d5, and if he takes e6, king e8, and he would get back his piece, and after knight e5, king c7, and this wouldn't be great for black, because his king is out in the danger. To avoid this, he played d4, but d4 is weakening his d pawn, and he's forcing himself to push c5 as soon as possible. Instead, he should have played something like rook c7, and in case of rook ac1, to go knight f8, and try to exchange knights on g6. If he plays knight d3, to go knight g6. And still, this position looks really blocked, and white would have tough time to crack this position open. But instead he plays d4, after which Fabiano plays rook ac1, and now c5 is played. And here Fabiano plays knight d5. It was also possible here to go for rook c4, the point being if knight b6, then rook c5. And after bishop c5 to go knight g5, and on king e8 to first take and to take on e6. After which those two knights connected with the pawn on e5 and the bishop on d2 will create plenty of problems. And if he doesn't play knight b6, then he can play cb4, but then just white can double on the c4 on the c file, and after takes a5, rook c7 is quite strong, and black would struggle to find any counterplay here. Let's say rook d8, knight d3, blocking the d pawn, and b7 pawn is under attack. Instead he played knight d5, which is also okay, And here Firouzja took on b4. Instead, it was better to play king g6, because now this knight is under attack, because there's no e6. Of course, if you take on d5 here, e6, king e8, and takes on d7, and we have something similar to the previous line, but even worse than previous line. If king c7, then knight g6 and rook e5, after which black is losing a piece, because if knight moves, the bishop on e7 is hanging. This is even worse case. So I said king g6 was better, and in case of knight f4, that would be just repetition of moves, and it would be leading to a draw. So the only way to go is to go knight e7. And after he takes, and takes on c5, knight c5, knight d4, white's a pawn up, but those two knights will block this extra pawn on the king side. But instead he took on b4, and now Fabi takes on e7, takes, and knight g5 is next. Here bishop b4 was much better. And after a move like knight d5, bishop d6, and in case of rook c3 to just give a check and take on e6. And if he tries rook hc8, in case of this to capture with the pawn, then black would just step away with rook cd1, and in case of d3, to go rook d2 and to double on the d file to attack this d3 pawn. And now it's not possible to defend this pawn because of knight d4, and rook a3 is impossible because of knight b5. So black can play knight b4 here, but after knight f4, king f5 and e6, white is much better here. But instead he played knight g5 here, and Firouzja goes king g6, and white takes first on c8. After that, he took on c8, and now knight e6 was played. Black attacks the e5 pawn by knight c6, and now Fabi plays f4. After which Firouzja goes for king f5, and also king f7 is fine for black, because after knight g5, king e7, now black is threatening to go knight c5, so white has to go rook c1. And now after a5 and let's say rook c4, knight a7 could be played, and after rook takes d4 to go for b5 and to even create a passed pawn on the queen side. But instead he went for king f5 here, and Fabi took king g6, knight e6, and now he avoided repetition with knight g5, after which Firouzja plays knight c5. Knight f7 was played, and now Firouzja plays king e6. Fabiano doesn't want to repeat with knight g5, so he goes knight d6 instead. Alireza plays rook g8, attacking the g3 pawn, and now Fabi plays king g2. If he played f5, that would just weaken his e5 pawn, and after king d5, he would have to defend both g3 and e5, so bishop f4 was the only move that made any sense. But now after knight d3, bishop on f4 is vulnerable, and also rook on e1 is the target, so there's a nice forced draw here with knight e4. And in case he captures, knight f6, king c5, and perpetual check with knight f6, knight d7 would happen in that case. So Fabi chose to play king g2 instead, and now Alireza tries to activate his king, king d5, rook b1, defending b3, and now knight e4. Tries to force the exchange of knights on e4. Fabi is forced to take it because g3 also hangs, and also if he plays bishop e1, then just this pawn is hanging on e5. So this is practically forced. King e4, and now rook c1 played by Fabi, and now Alireza enters with his king to d3. Bishop e1, and now king e2. It was better here just to go back to e4, and after rook c2 to go rook e8 and to make a blockade of these two pawns. But instead he went for king e2. He tries to push the d pawn, and now white also has his pawn. He plays e6. And now black plays d3, Fabi played f5, and now Alireza plays knight d4. If he played rook e8, for example, to stop those two pawns, now white can sacrifice his rook and take on b4. And in case of c5, to deflect the rook from the d pawn, he can just go bishop c3. And in case of d2, he can take and go g4, creating an h-pass pawn. And if black takes on g4, he can just start pushing, and after king c2, h6, king b3, f6, and after a couple of more moves, white is going to promote, and he's going to have a queen versus a rook, which I think is winning for white. Alireza chose to play knight d4, after which white took, and after d2, white takes on d2 and gets his rook to c5. And now white wants to go rook e5 and to push his f6 pawn. Black plays rook e8, and now rook e5 to cut off the king from the e-file and to prepare g4. Black's king gets to d3, and now king f2 first. Because if he goes g4 immediately, then black takes, and in case of king g3, black has a move knight f3, after which rook doesn't have a square on the e-file, so he has to go back to b5, and after king e4, black would be able to hold these pawns. Instead he plays king f2, and now rook e7 was played. If he waits with a6 here, then white has e7, and if knight c6, now he has rook e3, which is very important, and on king d4, f6. Rook e7 was played instead, and now g4. Alireza took, and now king g3. And now if knight c6 happens, then f6 is very strong, and those two pawns on f6 and e6 are very dangerous. So he plays rook e8 instead, now he takes, and now knight c6. But now Fabiano finds a nice move, king f4. And if black takes on e5, then king takes, and again, e6 and f5 are too strong for the rook. So instead he tries with knight e7, but still, white pushes the pawn, Alireza forks, but king f5 and now knight h4. King g5 and knight f3 now. But after king f4, knight goes to d4, because again, if you take on e5, these two pawns are very close to promotion, and the rook cannot stop them. So he tried like this, and after e7, now f7 is a big threat, and after knight c6, Fabiano pushed f7, and after rook e7, Fabiano played rook d5, and in this position, Alireza resigned, because on the next move, white is going to promote, and black is in a big material deficit. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day.